One of the hot topics these days is cesarean section. Wherever you go, everybody's talking, oh, why are you delivering vaginally? Let's do a cesarean section. It's easier, it's faster, you put the date, you go and just do it. You don't have to be in pain, you don't have any trauma to your pelvic area. And this is basically causing a little problem. Everybody wants to have a C-section. But is C-section the right way of delivering a baby? Is it more advantageous than a vaginal delivery? This is what we're going to be talking about now. So if you're going to look at statistics, cesarean section now is happening approximately in 33% of the deliveries. And this is in certain countries, because in some other countries, cesarean section is happening in 75 and 80% of the deliveries because of people wanting to have a C-section. But 33% is already like 1/3 of the deliveries. This is 1 of 3 deliveries happening by cesarean section, which is already a lot. Why people are doing cesarean section? What are the medical indications for doing a cesarean section? Because the natural way of delivering is a vaginal delivery. If a baby is coming in the breech presentation, it's okay to have a C-section. If you have non-reassuring fetal heart when you're trying to deliver, you go for a C-section. If you have twins, you go for a C-section, depending on the position of the twins. If you have a placenta previa, where you have a placenta that is coming before the head of the baby, then you have to have a C-section. If you have like a herpes infection that is active in the genital area at the time of the delivery, you need to have a C-section. And there is so many other like indications for a C-section. But C-section per se is not just the way to go. Recently, there was something called elective C-section on demand. So the woman will come to you and will ask you, I do want to have a C-section, I don't want to try vaginal delivery. Is that okay or it's not? There is many studies about that topic, and some are for and some are against. You have to know that each way of delivery has its own pros and cons, or risks and benefits. When you're delivering vaginally, yes, it does take a little more time. Yes, you have to be in labor for longer. You might have a little pain. You might end up having a C-section, because anybody that goes into labor, 20% of them will end up having a C-section just for any reason that happens during labor. You might have trauma to your genital area. You might have laceration, yes. But usually this is the natural way. For the baby, when the baby goes through the birth canal, it's squeezed, the lungs come empty, there is no fluid, there is no like breathing problems. There might be some risks on the baby, like the risk in doing anything. While if you're doing a C-section, first, it's a surgery. So you have an incision on your belly. So there is the risk of anesthesia, there is the risk of infection, there is the risk of clots in the legs, there is the risk of having bleeding more than the usual. And this is if you're having one C-section. And go and start adding 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 C-section if you're planning on having a big family. So the risks increase with each one number of C-section that is increasing. And one of the main serious side effects of C-section is when you're having a scar on the uterus, sometimes the placenta usually go and get stuck to the scar. And if this happens, this is a very dangerous situation. When you're trying to do another C-section, you might bleed and cannot stop bleeding, and you end up doing something called cesarean hysterectomy, where you have to remove the whole uterus and you cannot have any more kids. So whenever you're thinking about C-section, think about really the pros and cons for that. This is on the mother versus when on the baby. When you're doing a C-section, you're just basically taking the baby out quickly. Most of the time, the babies come out with wet lungs, and they have something called transient tachypnea of the newborn, because they have wet lungs and they're breathing a little fast, and sometimes you have to give them oxygen or watch them a little more, among some other things. So when we're deciding if you want to do a C-section or a vaginal delivery, in my opinion, vaginal delivery is still the way to go, unless there is like an indication for the C-section, like what I just mentioned when I started talking about C-section. One last question that you're asked when you're talking about cesarean section, because some people have the first cesarean section for an emergency and they would like to try to deliver vaginally after. So the question would be, can I deliver vaginally if I had the C-section before? And the answer is yes. So if you have one previous C-section for a non-recurrent indication, you can always try to deliver vaginally. It is a little riskier, but in good hands, and if somebody is watching all the time, you can definitely deliver vaginally after a C-section.